Greetings, students. I wanted to give you the opportunity to hear a little bit about enhancing content instruction from my perspective. So I have a few slides here to review with you and some ideas to share with you about some of the best ways to do that and some of the suggestions that you can take and put into practice right now for those of you that are in the field. What I would like you to be able to do at the end of this, because I like to start with an objective, is to be able to identify some strategies that enable your future students to process high volumes of content in an efficient and effective manner. We know that as students continue to progress in the grade levels, that the amount, the volume of content increases. Typically, we say that children learn to read in K to 3, and then after that, they read to learn. So starting in 4th grade, we see a big jump in curriculum, and then again, it jumps middle school, and then, of course, in high school. So our job is to help these children to process the enormous amount of information that starts to come their way. So what do we mean by content? I think that's where we need to start. And content, we're talking about the information, the text, the vocabulary, all of this that is coming their way at a rapid pace. It tends to be more complex, and we know as children age, it becomes more abstract. And sometimes we see children who aren't interested in the topics. I know some children are very interested in science and some are not. And the same way with social studies. And those are two areas typically when we think of content, we think of those. We also know that in the content area that, as I mentioned previously about the reading to learn and learning to read and then reading to learn, that literacy becomes more difficult for the children. Reading and writing, speaking and listening comprise the literacy component. And those children that already have a learning challenge, it makes it even more difficult to help that content information sink in. And we need to weigh that as we're helping our students progress. In the classroom, these might look like high school students or maybe even college students, because sometimes we know that students become bored. And typically when I see my students become bored in a college classroom, I like to spice it up and get them up and moving. And sometimes we see in the high school classroom the dull, boring lecture format. And we want to keep that boredom from setting in because we want our kids actively engaged in the learning. And sometimes we see that our students will say that they're bored. They'll also say, oh, it's just everything that I read in the book. Or sometimes we see teachers who just say, open your book to page 23, and then they read aloud all of the information with the students, and that becomes boring. Sometimes we hear students say that the information that was presented was very haphazard or disorganized, and they couldn't follow it well. And that's a concern because some students need that set structure. They're not abstract, random thinkers. And, we hear disconnected with the audience. We have some, I know in higher education, but we have this in high schools, middle schools, even in some of the elementary schools. Unfortunately, we see not as prevalent though from my experiences as a principal, but I have seen it where teachers are just disconnected from their students, and they just continue to march down the path that's in their lesson plan, and this is the content, and I have to teach it, and it doesn't matter if the kids are paying attention, it doesn't matter if they're engaged. So these are some of the complaints that we hear from students about the content area. Now, there are some key ideas, key questions that you want to consider when you are delivering content. First you want to think to yourself, well, what prior knowledge do my students have about this topic? So if you're teaching about fire prevention, it's Fire Safety Week, you can ask the students what their knowledge is of fire trucks, and have they ever visited a fire station, or because typically younger children have, and you can start from there. Have they ever practiced stop, drop, and roll? So you can engage students in prior knowledge and get them thinking about that. So as you're delivering new content, you can retrieve what they've already learned. So you would want to assess to see what prior knowledge students have in a certain area. Other thing that I think is key, and I always encourage the undergrads to take a look at this very carefully, is when you're starting a lesson, albeit an objective, if you state your objective, you can put it in writing on the board, but you should also read it to the students, and you can frame it in such a way to list what are the big ideas, what are the main concepts that I want the students to take away from this. And this is critical when we're working with kids that have learning needs and learning challenges, because they can get lost in all of the stuff. So what's really important? What are the 2 or 3 main ideas that you want the students to take away from this particular lesson? Then you have to think about, okay, so why would my students be interested or motivated to learn this information? And making it more relevant to what they're interested in, and what their prior knowledge is, tapping into that really helps to motivate them to be more interested in the content. Kids want to know, how does this apply to me? Why is this important? And we hear that a lot at middle school level and high school level. Another thing you want to think about as an instructor is, what type of notes do I want my students to take? Young children, we don't typically see note-taking. As children hit middle school and high school age, we do see note-taking. And if note-taking is expected, then will I show them how to take the notes? Or will I expect them to take the notes? Or will I have notes already typed up that they can use? Or will there be a note taker for the class? And some students, I've seen professors and teachers at the middle school and high school level have, they have assigned note takers, or people rotate note taking. I know one teacher in high school, in 9th grade history class, he had students rotate the note taking each day, and then that person was responsible for the notes. And then they had a Facebook page where it was just for that class, for that purpose, for note taking, and they would post them there every day. So here are some best practices to think about when you are teaching content. Number 1, and I've already said this, is keeping the students actively engaged. And active engagement is key for many reasons. It's key for behavioral reasons, because if students are actively engaged in their learning, then you'll have less off-task behavior, which means that you'll have less disciplinary issues to consider. So they'll be more on task, but they will also get more out of their learning if they're actively engaged. Enthusiasm, how enthusiastic are you about the topic that you're teaching? And I think that comes through in your voice, in your intonation, in your mannerisms. how excited you are when you present the information. And some information, trust me, from having taught sixth grade, some information is boring. And it's our job as teachers to find a way to present that so that kids feel excited about their learning. Clarity is important and relevance is important. It's important to be clear and concise and give the information. And I would also encourage you not to be too verbose. I think that's one of my limitations is that I tend to say more than what is necessary. So I try to be clear. And relevant is the information that you're providing them relevant to those 2 or 3 main ideas. And sometimes we tend to, Madeline Hunter would say bird walk, and start to walk down a path that isn't quite connected to those 2 or 3 main ideas. But that off-task conversation or discussion should be brought back to what is really important. How should you organize your instruction? One of the things that I would encourage you to have are advanced organizers. What visuals, what questions, what readings, what can you put in the student's hand ahead of time to help them start to prepare for their learning? And that's important at all levels, I think, but really important for younger children that have learning challenges. But it's certainly good for everyone. You want to think about getting students engaged with numbering the key points first, then next, especially kids who need help with speech and language issues. We know that this helps them to number their thoughts. Some language challenged children first, next, last. Sometimes using your finger to point helps. Note-taking guides. And I've already mentioned that about having notes, having students take the notes. And attention span. How long do you expect the students to sit, and how long do you expect them to participate in the group, and how much time do you allocate? So as you're planning, you want to make sure that you are allocating enough time for each aspect of that lesson when you're organizing the instruction. And again, you want to begin with your big ideas and end with your big ideas. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we did. And when you provide that closure, get those students to tell you what they did or show you what they did with those big ideas. I have several organizers that I've posted to your Blackboard lesson for this week. And you can see those called the frame, comparison table, content chart, and the before and after vocabulary. And they're in the form of PDFs. So you can take a peek at those and see how you might want to incorporate using those in your classroom. And here are some other ways that you can enhance content. The readability and revise to fit grade levels. And I have a readability chart that actually directions on how you can determine readability. And that'll be posted for you as well on this lesson. And, revising it in language that is more appropriate for that age level can be done quite readily and appropriate for the grade level. Venn diagrams, we use those a lot in math. We use those in science when we compare and contrast. So Venn diagrams are always good. Any kind of web or story map helps students to know sequencing. Flowcharts are good. Any study guides, they're always good for students. KWL, what I know, what I want to know, what I've learned charts, all of those help students to understand their content. And then I've attached here graphicorganizers.com where you can get free graphic organizers as you would like. So you can click on that and it'll take you to a site as well. So class, those are just several ideas for you when we talk about strategies that'll enable you to help your students. And I hope that you found those interesting and helpful. And I would like to encourage you to try one of those in your class, or perhaps maybe you have already tried one and there'll be a question for you on the discussion board that connects with this presentation.